Have you ever looked at someone and said, how are they so freaking positive? Or maybe, like me, you've been called a Debbie Downer a few times. Or maybe you're skeptical about the power of positivity. If so, then I'm positive you'll love today's guest because she is going to bring us a daily dose of sunshine you don't want to miss. Because the most important story in your life is the one you tell yourself. You've heard it said that storytelling is everything. But what if everything is storytelling? What if every action we take, every word we speak, every thought we think is a story? If so, then we all need to be better storytellers because the story we tell will determine the impact we make in our lives, in our work, and in our dreams. I'm Jonathan Jordan, your storytelling coach, and this is Everything is Storytelling, a podcast for people obsessed with story. Our guest today is Sara Schroeder. She has done a lot of stuff. She's owned a fitness business. She has been a professor, and now she runs her own life coaching business, helping elder millennials, which I don't know if I should take offense to that as one of those, and Gen Xers get fit mentally, physically, and financially. And by the way, she's definitely in the top 3 positive people that I personally know. So, Sara, I'm so excited to talk with you today. This has taken much too long for us to connect like this.
I know. I am so excited. I'm so glad to be here and to chat with you. And yeah, this is going to be awesome.
You know, that is a really interesting career trajectory. So can you give a little bit of just a short overview of your personal story and specifically like what those career transitions were from professor, franchise owner, life coaching? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. It is kind of a whirlwind. So my first job after I got my master's was at the University of North Texas, and I taught college rhetoric, writing 1 and 2, and I loved it. It was great. I really enjoyed it. And that's kind of how the mindset thing started, actually, because I was 24, 25, super young, and the kids, they felt connected to me, right? So they would come chat with me about their assignments. But then they would ask me how to navigate college. Like, what do I do with this and all this stuff? And so that's kind of where the first mindset portion came in. But while I was a professor there, Camp Gladiator had opened, and I went to go check out one of their workouts. That's the fitness franchise. And I just went to go be what they call a camper. And they said, "We love you. Go get certified. We want you to become a personal trainer with us." And I thought, sure, why not? So I went and got certified. And for, probably at least 8 years, maybe 9, I was doing the personal training group fitness every morning, teaching during the day, and then doing group fitness training at night. And that was just what I did. And it was amazing. And I loved every aspect of it. And then it got to a point where the teaching was great, but I felt that I needed to move just strictly with the fitness franchise and really own that business and own the city in which I lived. And so that's what I did. Left teaching, stayed, and then just basically owned my city from 2011 through 2019 and grew that. We started with like 25 campers, 25 clients. And by the time I sold it, it was with additional trainers and whatnot, there were over 2,000 people. It was crazy. Just in
Holy
our
cow.
Yeah, it was insane. But during that time, I had hired my first mentors and life coaches, and working with them through different things. One of them asked me in 2019, "What do you want, Sara?" My favorite question. And I was like, what I want is to do what you're doing. Like, take that to the next level, become a life coach. And he said, "So why aren't you doing that?" And I didn't have an answer. So the very next day, I went and got my LLC, and I was getting certified during that time too with life coaching. So then it was the fitness franchise and the life coaching. And then I made the decision to solely focus on the life coaching, sold my franchise in 2019, and have had my life coaching business ever since.
That's awesome. You had really good timing selling it in 2019.
What? To be fair, they excel. They just did everything online virtually, and so they
Cool.
did an awesome job with it. So yeah,
Okay, cool. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm glad to hear that because a lot of our colleagues in the business that we had the franchise in, they really struggled with the pandemic because they like some of them had to close up shop and everything. So we
Mm,
were like, we're so glad we sold like years before when we did.
yeah,
But
yeah.
okay, yeah, that makes I think a whole lot more sense. Just kind of how those steps happen for you. So let's kind of shift gears a little bit and get into the storytelling side of it because obviously that's our theme around here. And I think you're going to have a really interesting way to frame this because I always talk a lot about storytelling and story as something external, as a way for you to connect to others. So I'd love to hear, like, how do you view the role of story more internally as a mental device, especially again when we think of it more, as an external device typically.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is because we place so much externally, but if you look at the hero journey, if you look at anything, it's what you have to overcome on the inside. So for
Mhm.
me, it's just such an internal, it starts with how you view yourself, what your values are, what your foundation is. So that's where the storytelling is. Like, where are you right now at this point? What's the
Mm.
truth about where you are and who you are? Is this something, like what do you like about it? What are your strengths? That's an internal thing. Nobody can, like, people can
Yeah.
tell you what you're good at, but what's the story you're telling yourself?
Mm.
And like how do you actually want to live your life? If
Mm.
you had a choice, which you do, when you accept that you have this choice, the storytelling becomes, here's what I know about myself, but
Mhm.
here's where I want to go. Here's what I want to become. And the
Mm.
story is then, am I actively living the lifestyle that's going to push me where I want, or put me, not push, I guess a little bit, challenge me to who I want to become. And that's where the story, what do you say to yourself when you wake up every morning?
Mm.
What thoughts are going through your mind? What thoughts are going through your mind throughout the day? When you have your lulls in the day, and when you're doubting yourself, or you have, why are you doubting yourself? What's that story? Where is that story coming from? Because it's not,
Yeah.
well, we claim it's an external thing, but really it's based around what we learned growing up from age 7 and then how we've navigated that. So it really is, it sounds philosophical, but it's like, who am I? What do I believe? What do I think? What do I value? But I mean,
Yeah.
that's what it is. So I just
Yeah.
watched Blue Panda last night and like, that makes me think about all of it. Because man, like he's going through, and each stage is like a different stage for him, but it's all like an internal thing. Anyway.
Yeah. Hey, we love Kung Fu Panda around here. So, sometimes, man, sometimes kids movies like they land the biggest points. Like they do get philosophical. Sometimes they make you go deep.
Yeah,
So,
me too. Zoolander is another one. Speaking of storytelling, watch Zoo- that's my favorite. Not Zoolander, Zootopia, not
Oh,
Zoolander.
okay.
Zootopia. I was like, "What's wrong?" Zootopia. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the one with the bunny. Gosh, the whole thing. Yeah, and her goals and like, well, I'm gonna be the first person to do it. No bunny has ever done this.
Yeah.
Well, the story I'm telling myself inside is that I'm gonna do this. Like, it's amazing.
No, I think that makes so much sense because, yeah, the story you tell yourself, even though it is philosophical and it is in the mind, it does inform action eventually.
Mhm.
Um, you can only, you can only fake it for so long where your actions don't line up with the way that you're thinking and the way that you're believing about yourself. You can fake it for a little bit, but eventually it will crumble.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point because yeah, like the fake it till you make it, but like your actions fall in line with your thoughts.
Yeah.
So it just, if you keep, yeah, that the story you tell yourself, that's why it's so important to be like, well, is this scary or is it just, I'm afraid of it for these reasons that don't
Mm,
really exist, right? Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something that people like myself who struggle with positive thinking, like that's something we have to tell ourselves. And I've had to practice is saying, is this actually a true thought? Because just because
Mhm.
it's in my head doesn't mean that's true. And yeah, it could have started out as an external thing. It could have started out as an influence from, family, background, trauma, whatever. But at some point it got internalized. And the hard work is digging that back up, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard work, but it's fulfilling once you like dig that up and then rewrite your story, right? With the new,
Yeah.
that's the beauty of storytelling is that we have the capacity to write a new one every single day when we wake up. So
Yeah. And it's not just philosophical because neuroscience supports that. Like we
true.
know so much more now. They used to tell us growing up, maybe you heard this too, back in school, that, well, you got to be careful about damaging those brain cells because once they're gone, they're gone. And now we're learning, well, that's not completely true. You can rewire the brain and you can heal the brain through these different practices and change beliefs and change your actions. And yeah, neuroscience, I can nerd out on it for a while, but it's so cool.
I agree. It is so much fun. Yeah.
So let's kind of go to that side of things with negative thinking in particular and turning that around, replacing it, because for a long time, what I would say and what I would justify is I would say things like, well, I'm not really negative. I'm just a realist. So when you hear people say that, what's kind of your go-to response for them?
Not everybody, including me, this might be shocking to some people, but like not everybody can be positive all of the time. It's
Sure.
not, it's impossible, right? So when people say, I'm a realist, that's what they're choosing to believe. I'm a realist because this is fact. But a
Mm.
fact is like the weather. It's 106 degrees right now. That is real, right? It's 106 or whatever it is here in Texas. Um, and so I'm hot. This is awful. I hate this weather. That's not being a realist. That's a feeling behind the fact. So you're not necessarily being a realist, but you're not being a realist. It's you're accepting what is and then choosing to stay in that negative aspect
Mm.
of it rather than choosing something different. So I like to think of it as kind of like if you can be positive thinking 51% of the time, then that's going to move you ahead. And it's really
Mm.
important to note here with the realist, and especially as a coach or just in storytelling in general, you have to accept when something is wrong with you, when
Mm.
you're in a funk or when you're experiencing that negative emotion. You can't ignore it because the second you ignore it and try and ignore it and be like, oh, everything's great, like I can always be positive, that's actually creating a bigger negative impact in you because now everything is just it's like festering in your system and it's going to come out in different ways that you don't want to see. It all can come out in stress and anxiety and worry and disease and all that stuff.
Mhm.
When people say, oh, I'm just being a realist, they're choosing to think that their reality is based in the negative when in
Mm.
actuality, it's the story that they're wanting to accept about themselves because it's more comfortable than challenging it and saying, what's another way to think about this?
Yeah, so it's a matter of there may be some truth behind the negative thought, but how can you make the positive thought more real? So to use the weather as an example, because it's a perfect one for Texas, it's like, yeah, you can think it's 106 degrees. That's the fact. And you can go to the negative thought, which is this is miserable. It feels terrible, blah, blah, blah. Or you can say it's 106 degrees outside. Again, that's the fact. And I'm so thankful I have air conditioning,
Right?
right?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. You also have to accept where you are, right? Like it might
Mhm.
not be 106 in other areas of the US right now, but we chose to
Yeah.
live in Texas. And if you've been in Texas, like you kind of know what's going to happen. And
Right.
what the reality is this just sucks. Is that the reality? I'm being realistic, or is that just what you're thinking? And why are you thinking that way? Who are you like what again is the story that you're saying that makes it negative?
Yeah. Yeah. So you touched on this a second ago about how, no one can be positive 100% of the time. And even though you are a very positive person, I'm sure there's moments that you struggle with that.
Yeah.
So for you, what does it look like to maintain your own positivity? What are some practices you have for yourself?
Yeah. So I posted about this yesterday. I was in a funk
Hmm.
yesterday morning, quite honestly. And what I typically do, I'll wake up, I kind of like ground myself in the morning, and I have a phrase that I say to myself, well, this is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. That's every morning when I wake up, that is what I say. And I just kind of put it
Mm,
on repeat. And some mornings I don't know what happens. That just doesn't click, right? So other things I love to do is I do some breath work for between 6 and 10 minutes, depending, and then I'll journal and pray. And so that's a lot of what I do. And just to kind of go into it yesterday, none of that stuff was working. I didn't
mm,
physically feel well, and I didn't
yeah.
know what it was at the time. And I'd wake up early all the time, even on weekends. And so in that instance, I could just tell my body was like, hey, don't go run, don't go do this thing that you're supposed to go do, go to this little group meeting in the morning, stay here and sleep. And so that's what I did. I could
Mm,
physically feel in my body, in my the just everything. And so in that instance, I felt it, I acknowledged it, and I felt that, well, if you don't go run, then this is going to happen. Or if you don't go here, then people are going to think this. And then I just had to say, you know what? That's okay. I have to rest here. And so I slept more. And honestly, sometimes emotional release is a big thing too. So being
yeah.
fully honest, I don't know what happened. I cried a little bit yesterday morning too. Like before I fell asleep, I just cried. And that release in and of itself, that and falling asleep, helped me. Then when I got up again, I journaled and realized right away, I need to go move my body now. So for me, it's a lot about the breath work. It's a lot about very specific phrases that I have committed to memory, that I write down, that I journal. I write down Psalm 23 every morning.
Mm,
It's just, and then I work out in the morning typically. That's what helps me. But even on times when things aren't going well, I acknowledge, I'm real about where I am and what I need in that moment, which can include crying or can include some other things as well, sleeping in instead of going to do what I had on my calendar, and that just wasn't it.
right. Right.
Mhm.
So it's letting sometimes the body tell a story to the mind, like, hey,
Yeah,
this is what I need right now.
exactly, exactly. And you've got to be so. I was the queen of ignoring that. And
Mm,
I ran into a lot of health issues when I ignored that, quite honestly. So you
yeah.
really, and so like being like positive is not, there's a difference. The story that you tell yourself, oh, I don't feel good, that means I don't have to work out. There's a difference. That's a different story than, no, you quite literally are feeling fatigued and overly emotional, whatnot. You need to stay here. So those are two different stories. And how are you identifying between those two stories? Is it just like an excuse or like a distraction to not work out or not do the things, or is it
Mm,
actually a story that means something? So really being aware of that too. And that's why knowing your values and knowing who you are and that
mm.
foundation is important.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said about just the power of rest too, and just letting ourselves stop. Because I'm not always very good at that. In fact, I'm often not good at that. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you help people, especially for those out there who maybe they've never worked with a life coach. They don't quite know what that looks like. Sometimes it can sound a little hippy dippy, right? So, I'd love to maybe hear a story about, was there a recent time you worked with a client, saw them dealing with something negative, whether it was their mindset or a circumstance, and like, what did you do with them and how did you help them harness positive thinking to reframe the situation? You don't have to say anyone's name or anything like that, but I'd love to maybe just hear like an example that happened recently.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a really good point. Coaching is always confidential, right? Because y'all
Yeah.
are it's
Right.
a very like personalized experience. But yeah, I had a client recently. So I like to focus on, where you are. And one thing that people don't highlight enough is their strengths and
Mm,
their achievements.
mm,
Um, and so a lot of times, and sometimes on repeat, what are your strengths? How did you use your strengths to your advantage this week? Like, in what ways did it help you take purposeful action? And one client in particular has just started CrossFit, of all things, actually,
mm,
and was really excited about it. And like how this has helped that him and his family and his business, just because he wakes up in the morning and he does something to get himself right for the day, right? This is his journey. And he was saying that it was going well. And yet every single morning when he was waking up, when he woke up, he had his dad's voice in his head. And it was all about, you're just going to fail. You're not good.
mm,
Why are you doing this? Do you don't need to do this? You just need to, this isn't going to do anything. And it was just a lot of negative talk that he would
mm,
hear first thing in the morning. And sometimes that would prevent him from being consistent and getting up because that voice was so prominent. And the story that he heard, he believed. So he
mm.
stopped for a little bit and didn't know what to do. And so when we were chatting about it a little bit more, I said, when have you written down he writes them down. I was like, but where do you have your strengths? Like, where are those? Are they written down somewhere? And he said, well, no. So he wrote them down on a piece of paper, put it by his nightstand. And just for a week, I was like, for a week, every time you wake up and you hear that negative voice, the very first thing, just look at your strengths and say, actually, I am strong. I am this, whatever it might be, and use that to combat the negative voice and see what that does for your consistency in going to the gym and how you feel throughout the day. And he
Yeah.
did that. He was consistent about that. And he said, you wouldn't believe, like, I was able to quiet that negative voice, which was a huge thing for him because that was the story he heard for years and years and years. And he said, for the first time in my life, I was hearing a different story, and it was my own story about
Yeah.
my strengths. And so now I'm excited to get out of bed and go to CrossFit, and I'm coming home with more vigor to take care of my toddler and I think his other daughter's like 4 or 5, and his wife and all of this stuff. He's like, with just that really hyper focus, that was the only thing we practiced is reframing those negative thoughts with his strengths and the new story. And that changed everything for him in 7 days. And so this was, I think, a month ago. And now, kind of funny, like it's become like he's stronger at the gym. He actually got a promotion at work.
Nice.
Yeah. And like these little things started happening just because he reframed that story by just looking at his strengths instead of the old what if I fail judgment fear kind of thing.
Have you read Soundtracks by John Acuff?
I haven't.
You
No.
haven't? Okay. So he has this framework he teaches in that book, and it's called Soundtracks because it's about this idea of you've got a playlist in your head, right? Of all these thoughts. And at a certain point, a playlist gets old and you need to replace it. And so you got to take out those old tracks, put the new tracks in. And there's this framework he uses of 3 questions that I really like, where he says 3 questions for you to reorient from negative to positive. Ask, is this thought true? Second, is this thought kind? And then third, is this thought helpful? So if you can pass a thought through those 3 filters and it still, survives, then it's a good thought to hold on to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's one that you need to remove from the playlist and
Yeah.
and drop something else in, right?
I love the idea of a playlist. That's
Well,
fantastic.
you have a
I
playlist.
do have a playlist, yes, and so now I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that just" yeah, but I love that because you bring up such a good point too, and the fact, like, is this thought true, kind, helpful? Because, when we start where we are, sometimes
Mhm.
the thoughts that we need to like reframe to get us out of that old pattern work really well. But then we have that new awareness level and that new frequency. And so those thoughts, even though they're true, they're not helpful anymore because we're
Right.
on a different level. And so now we can add a new playlist, a new song, something that, you know, when you're healing from something, you're listening to certain kinds of songs. When you're like at a certain level of forgiveness, now there's new songs. And then like if that just like kind of catapults forward. I love that. And to add to those questions, those are great questions. I just wrote those down. And I think now that you said that, I think I've heard of that book before, but I'm definitely going to read it now. But yeah, another great thing to ask is like, what's a different way to think about this? Because we're so used to thinking about it a certain way and then acting and behaving in a certain way because of that. It's like, what's a different way to think about this? And to use kind of a funny example, you know, I had breakfast with my parents this morning, and, you know, sometimes your parents can get on your nerves a little bit. And like my mom said something and it was annoying. And then I did have to sit there and take a breath for a second. And then I thought, what's a different way to think about this? And I just thought about it differently. And I was like, and it just made me think about a different, like a more solution, and that's not the right word, but it made me think about it in a way like, oh, here's where she's coming from. I get that now, and now this is kind and helpful. Now I get why she's saying like this is true, and I see where she's coming from, right? So adding, you know, how to think about it differently is such a great reframe for you, and including the other question is, why not? Instead of what if, it's always, why not? Try this. Why not do this? Why not whatever it might be?
That reminds me of, I had a client once who, one of the exercises she did with one of her clients, because she's an executive coach, she said this one this one client, the issue was that she read every email like it was an attack. And so it was creating a lot of strife in the workplace because it was the interior voice and how she was interpreting everything that she received digitally. And so my client did this exercise with her client, just saying, hey, I want you for a week to just read every single email like it's a love letter. I just read it like it's a love letter and just see how your response to it changes. And you know, and it sounds ridiculous, right? Like it sounds so ridiculous, but it worked.
I mean, I think that's, it's amazing. You're like, a love letter, really? But then you do it and it's like, oh, well, yeah, okay, now I'm looking at it a different way. Doing everything. And when you can do that more in the background, behind the scenes, with the thoughts that you're thinking in your head and the story you're telling yourself, that's what you're going to see in the scenes, right? So like what you see on the screen, that's the best part about books and movies, right? Like we're seeing them as they currently are. But what happened? Like, what were their thoughts? How did they grow up? You know, like we get little tidbits, but like, what were their thoughts to get them here and why they are this way and why they have to undergo the hero's journey? Because we're all going through that, right?
Yeah. So do you have a favorite exercise that you like to use with a brand new client who is just trapped in negative thinking? Do you have kind of like an easy on-ramp for them?
Yes and no. Like everybody always gets the same questions and it's written down first. So before we have the discovery call a lot of times, and then and I ask them there, what do you want? And they look at me wide-eyed and like, I have no idea how to answer that. I was like, answer it however you want to, no big deal. And they do. And then when they're onboarded, I have them fill out, you know, a little questionnaire. And the first question is, what do you want? And then they have to write that down. And then I take that with me because I ask them again, like, what do you really want? Because what they said that first time, what is written, and then that third time are like they have similar aspects, but they're three different things. And so, but when we get to the third one, now they're thinking more deeply about what they want, right? And what the actual foundation is behind that question.
Yeah.
And then it goes into like, so what do you want? Like, what do you mean by that? And then they think, huh, okay, what do I mean by that? And then they'll answer, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? It takes about 5 times. On the 5th one, it's not like I want to have personal freedom or I want to have time to take my kids to go get ice cream after school.
Yeah.
It becomes so much more important. Like, I want my kids to know this or have this sense of, whatever it might be. It's not just like freedom, but now it really means something. So, and that's the biggest thing with people who are running into any kind of results, whether it's, results in relationships or current results in relationships, current results in their health or current results in their finances. If they're not seeing something that they want, it's because they're currently running through a story of what they think they can't have or what they think isn't possible. So my whole me asking these questions is to help them to start thinking in the, oh, well, this is actually what I want. Okay, what do you mean by that? Well, I mean, like, I want to have this amount of money so I can do this with it, so I can open this, or so I can give back in this way. And then they really start to think about it. And now it opens up how they've been blocking themselves. Because I never, as a coach and not as a consultant, I'm here to ask questions because they already have all the answers inside of them. They have like what you do. They have the story inside of them. You're just like it out through. Yeah. And that I help them pull it out with those questions. And then through those questions, we create the plan of action that becomes the consistent habits, thoughts that get them the results that they actually want. So,
yeah, I mean, it sounds a lot like you're helping them to learn how to be specific about their own answers and about what they really want, because there is a lot of power in specificity.
Yeah, that is such a big, oh, I want that, and we all want a million different things. I call it like shiny penny, like, oh, shiny penny over here, shiny penny over there. The grass is greener kind of thing. It's like, no, like, this is very much a, hey, instead of looking all these other places, let's look where you are with the strengths that you have, with the values that you want and who you want to become, and what we can do behind the scenes to make that happen in the scenes. So,
yeah, cool. So while we're talking about specifics, can you share a little bit more about specifically what you have to offer to people?
Yeah, absolutely. So I primarily focus on one-on-one coaching, 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months. Yeah. And that is something because for me, coaching is a relationship and a partnership. So I am with you there to, to challenge you and to challenge those excuses and to help you get out of your comfort zone. So initially we have an hour-long conversation, sometimes longer, just about, where you currently are, what your results are. And then from there, we build your tailored plan of action. And primarily, we say 3 months, at least 12 weeks, because it takes 12 weeks for things to really happen and activate, if you will, right? Like whether it's a workout program or if you're trying to hit a work financial goal, or if you're trying to have a better relationship with yourself or with others, you've got to first uncover and unlayer what those limiting beliefs are and then move forward. So typically 3 months, but most people tend to stay on for 6 months. And I have several that have stayed on for a year also. So it's very much tailored to you and what you need. Is this something too that, are we talking every day, or is it just kind of, we meet once a week in person? That's another, we always meet in person or virtually, I should say. And then I'm in your pocket, whatever you need, right? And then we do an evaluate, like a first month coaching evaluation, mid-month, and then at the end, because you do see tangible results. That is something that's extremely important for anybody who's going to hire a life coach. You do see results, whomever you work with, when you put in the work.
Yeah.
So whatever it is that you want, like you can see, you can break down, like if you are looking for a year goal, that's probably not to achieve a goal in a year-long results. goal. That's going to take that, 3 months isn't going to get you to that year-long goal, but it will
Right.
get you further along. So it really depends on what you want and how willing you are to take that action to get there. So
Yeah. Yeah. You still got to do the hard work yourself.
yeah. Yeah.
Are there any specific books or resources that you want to recommend to people check out?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of my favorites, one is The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Pearl. And it's
Okay.
an old school book, but man, it just has nuggets in there. And the more you think it, like if you just read through it, it's like, oh, well, that makes sense. Also, I love it's right in here, The Magic of Thinking Big. That's a great
Okay.
one. And The Four Agreements is always great because that's,
Mm,
like taking personal responsibility, not making assumptions, those kinds of things. Like we base our life so much on assumptions and especially assumptions of others.
yeah.
So it's my goal when we work together to help you break out of those assumptions and to really focus on the story of your life.
Mm, yeah. Makes sense. Cool. So 3 solid recommendations for people to go start out with. Now, if people want to connect with you though, and they want to kind of take that next step, where is, I guess, the easiest place for them to find you, connect with you, all that good stuff?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on Instagram, and it's all Sara Schroeder.
Okay.
I would say like it's more like fun on the Instagram and more, I guess, some of the things on LinkedIn are different than, what I post on Instagram in a fun way. So follow me on
Right.
if you're like, oh, hey, I want to see like where she's going, like how many curbs she hit today with her car, which is a very fun thing on Instagram that we do all the time because it's at least 3 every day. And I don't know. It's just they get in my way. That's all.
This was so great because yeah, so much starts in our minds, and with our actions then having to follow whatever story our mind is telling to us. So yeah, I love this idea of reframing your thoughts, injecting some positivity, looking from a different perspective. And yeah, sometimes you need someone to help you with that. Most of us can't do that completely by ourselves.
Yeah, right. There's that limit. Yeah, we're all blocked. Like we have those limiting beliefs and those blocks. So someone just needs to be there to kind of like unlock the door and open it for you. So
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I tell people all the time, you look at, the greatest athletes in the world and they have coaches.
yeah.
Like they may have the raw talent, they have that ability within them, but they do need someone coming alongside them to help bring out that best, right?
Yep, absolutely. That mental toughness and that accountability and discipline and building trust in yourself. Totally.
Yeah, awesome. Well, cool. Well, Sara, thank you so much for sharing all this with us. Loved getting to chat with you like this.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Sara, thanks again for coming on to the show to talk about how often the most important story is the one that we tell ourselves and the power of positive thinking. So if you need to connect with Sara, if that is a message that you need more of in your life, then connect with her through the links that are in the show notes. Just got to scroll down there to find them. And while you're down there, leave a 5-star review and rating for the show if this was helpful to you. And hey, if you know other story-obsessed people, then make sure that you tell them about the show so that we can all become better storytellers together. Because when we're better storytellers, then we can keep changing the world one story at a time.